Yevgeny Prigozhin, the leader of the Russian Wagner private military company, is dead. He died in a plane crash on the 23rd of August this year, 2023. And this raises a number of questions. First of all, is he really dead, or are the Russians faking his death? Secondly, if he is really dead, then was this a genuine air crash? Was this a genuine aircraft accident, plane accident, or was this a targeted assassination? Because from the looks of it, it looks like a complete decapitation strike on the top leadership of the Wagner military company. So was this a genuine plane crash, or was this an assassination? If this was an assassination, then who could have been behind the assassination? Could it have been the West? Could it be NATO? Or could it be the boss himself, Mr. Putin? And then, if Mr. Putin could be behind this, then why would he have Mr. Prigozhin assassinated? Did Mr. Putin regard Mr. Prigozhin as a traitor? Was the 23rd of June Wagner rebellion genuinely a rebellion? Was it really a coup attempt against Mr. Putin? Was I wrong about it being a psychological operation? And lastly, is this the end for Wagner? Please subscribe and let's find out. So the first question is Mr. Prigozhin really dead, or are the Russians faking his death? Well, there is absolutely no evidence anywhere in the media or social media or anywhere else that this is a faked death. There is no evidence for that whatsoever. Every media in the world, whether it's the Russian media or the Western media or whoever else, everyone is saying that it is a genuine plane crash and he is really dead. So I see no evidence whatsoever to support any claim that maybe this is a faked death. We know that Mr. Prigozhin did have apparently a body double. A body double is an individual who has the physical attributes of the original person. So it is said that various dictators and presidents, etc., world leaders have body doubles. Saddam Hussein was alleged to have had a body double. Kim Jong-un of North Korea is alleged to have at least one body double. It is alleged that Mr. Putin himself has a couple of body doubles, and apparently Mr. Prigozhin also had at least one body double. But there is absolutely no evidence that this plane crash did not involve Mr. Prigozhin. So from the looks of it, he genuinely is dead. And then the question also arises that what could the Russians achieve by faking his death? I mean, as a kid, I watched this James Bond movie, You Only Live Twice, Sean Connery, in which James Bond fakes his death and then he's able to achieve certain objectives. That's what the movie was about. It was a kind of sci-fi spy thriller. But Mr. Prigozhin was no Mr. James Bond, and he did not have any special abilities or special talents or any superhero capabilities that would better serve him or his nation if he were believed to be dead. So I see no reason to believe any claims that maybe he is not dead. So let's consider that his death is a genuine thing, that he's really dead. Then the question arises, was this plane crash a genuine plane accident? Was it a genuine accident, or was there foul play involved in this? So he died in a plane crash. The aircraft that was involved in this was an Embraer private jet. It was traveling from Moscow to St. Petersburg, and it went down approximately 100 kilometers from Moscow. And if you look at the video of the incident, some people have taken grainy video of the plane crashing down. If you look at the video, then there is no real evidence that of the plane having exploded. You do see something that looks like a streak in the sky that could indicate perhaps a missile shoot down, but there is no conclusive evidence for that. There is no conclusive evidence of this being a case of exploding mangoes like what Ziaul Haq had. So there is no real evidence from the footage that conclusively proves any specific theory. We don't know if this was a genuine plane crash or whether there was some kind of foul play involved in this. And what's strange and what's remarkable, what's interesting is that this accident, the death of Mr. Prigozhin, happened exactly 2 months after the Wagner Group's apparent rebellion and apparent coup against Mr. Putin, which happened on the 23rd of June. And exactly 2 months later, on the 23rd of August, Mr. Prigozhin dies in an apparent plane crash. And it was not just Mr. Prigozhin, it was also Mr. Dmitry Utkin and various other top leaders of Wagner who perished in the air crash. There were a total of 10 people on the plane, including 3 crew, and the rest were Wagner personnel, top leaders of Wagner. So it looks like the entire top leadership was taken out, most of it, not all of it. It looks like a decapitation strike on the organization. So we don't have evidence. I mean, I'm not sure what the Russians have said. The Western media is speculating that Mr. Putin may have taken it out. And in my Wagner rebellion video, in the video in which I analyzed the Wagner rebellion, this is what I said. Does this mean that Prigozhin is now a marked man? Does he now have a target on his back? Is Prigozhin in danger of meeting an untimely end? Well, time will tell us. So I said that time will tell whether Mr. Prigozhin has a target on his back, whether he is a marked man. And time did tell us. 2 months after the rebellion, he is dead. So, and why did I speculate whether he would be a marked man? Because clearly the person who would want to take him out, on the balance of probabilities would have been Mr. Putin. So I did speculate about this, whether he would be a marked man. And as it turned out, he was a marked man. I do not see this plane crash as being a genuine accident. It doesn't make any sense that such a coincidence would happen, that most of the Wagner top leadership, including Mr. Prigozhin, would die in a plane crash. Such coincidences don't typically happen in real life, and that too coincidentally exactly 2 months after the Wagner rebellion. So from my perspective, I think that on the balance of probabilities, this must have been a targeted assassination. And then the question is, was it the West? Was it NATO? Was it Mr. Putin himself, the boss himself? So let's assume theoretically, hypothetically, that the West took him out. Now, why would they take him out? So we know that the Wagner Group is involved significantly, to a significant extent, in the Sahel region and other parts of Africa. There's the events in Niger that are happening as we speak. I have a video on that as well. I'll make more videos in the future about that particular matter. So Wagner is involved in expanding Russia's geopolitical footprint in Africa. And as of today, the Cold War 2.0 has moved to Africa. There are two major forces in Africa. One is the West, which is France, the US mainly, and the other is Russia. And the Wagner Group is at the forefront of establishing and expanding Russia's geopolitical footprint in Africa. China is not involved, neither is India. It's the West and Russia, and Wagner is at the core, at the heart of Russia's activities in Africa. And the fact that Wagner is a paramilitary organization, it's a private military company, this fact gives Russia plausible deniability, because they can claim that this is a private company that's doing whatever is happening there. It's not the Russian government. So Wagner is a great asset for the Kremlin, for Putin, for Mr. Putin to have. So from that perspective, yeah, you could say that, yeah, maybe NATO was behind this, maybe the US, maybe the West was behind the assassination of Mr. Prigozhin. But then you have to ask yourself, what would that achieve? What would taking out Mr. Prigozhin achieve? Russia can very easily replace Mr. Prigozhin with somebody else, and everything else in Africa, the Wagner activities in Africa, will proceed as if nothing has changed. So taking out Mr. Prigozhin doesn't change any ground realities in Africa. If the US, if the West, if NATO, if France, etc., they really want to change the ground realities in Africa, which they are being challenged by Russia, then they would have to take action against Wagner on the ground in Africa. Taking out Mr. Prigozhin makes no sense whatsoever. It changes nothing. So from this logic, it's clear that it would not have been the West that did this. It would not have been NATO that took out Mr. Prigozhin. So then, if this was really an assassination, then it leaves us with one candidate, which could possibly perhaps be Mr. Putin, the boss. So then the question arises, why would Mr. Putin have Mr. Prigozhin assassinated along with much of the top leadership of the Wagner Group? Now let's rewind back, let's go back in time to understand the context and what could have happened. So let's go back to early May this year, May 2023. The Battle of Bakhmut was in full swing. As you remember, the battle lasted 224 days, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. And the Wagner Group was at the forefront of the fighting from the Russian side in the Battle of Bakhmut, and arrayed against them were the entire armed forces of Ukraine. And the media was calling this the Bakhmut meat grinder because of the immense and horrific casualties that ensued and resulted as part of this battle. So, in early May this year, Wagner, which means Mr. Prigozhin. Mr. Prigozhin announced that he was withdrawing Wagner from Bakhmut because Wagner was apparently being starved of ammunition and weapons and supplies by Mr. Sergei Shoigu and Mr. Valery Gerasimov. Shoigu is the Minister of Defense and Mr. Gerasimov is the Chief of General Staff. So he blamed these two individuals for starving Wagner of supplies of arms, of ammunition, in a video that is available on the internet. And he completely excoriated these two individuals for what was happening. He blamed them for the immense casualties that Wagner had taken. He showed a number of dead bodies of his fighters, and he was apoplectic in that video, enraged, and he blamed these two individuals. And he said that Wagner would withdraw from Bakhmut and somebody else can take over because we are done and we can no longer keep on fighting the way we are being treated. And he even apparently blamed Shoigu and Gerasimov for launching a strike on his fighters, apparently. So that's what happened in early May. But by the 20th of May, not only had Wagner not withdrawn from Bakhmut, they had captured the city. And the Battle of Bakhmut was over after 224 days. So this, in effect, was a masterful psychological operation, a masterclass in how you conduct battlefield psychological operations and deceive and fool the enemy. So that's what Mr. Prigozhin achieved, and he took the city of Bakhmut after incredibly horrific fighting for 224 days. So that was the Battle of Bakhmut. Fast forward a month, and in June, on the 23rd of June, there was this Wagner rebellion. And as soon as the news broke out, I tweeted that this was a psychological operation. Mr. Prigozhin again went after Mr. Shoigu and Mr. Gerasimov. He demanded that Shoigu and Gerasimov be handed over to him. And he also made a statement saying that the justifications for the invasion of Ukraine, the special military operation, he said that the justifications for this were lies. And then he took his Wagner Group out of the Donbass region, entered Russia. He captured the city of Rostov-on-Don, and he got a very warm, almost rapturous welcome from the citizens of this city after he captured the city. So that was kind of a significant red flag and alarm bells. If you are the president of Russia, if the residents of a significantly not small city give a very warm and rapturous welcome to a guy who is apparently conducting a coup against Mr. Putin, that is danger signs. That is danger signs. So that's what happened. On the 24th of June, apparently the Wagner forces were, rolling towards Moscow. But then the president of Belarus, Mr. Alexander Lukashenko, said that he had negotiated a settlement with Wagner, with Mr. Prigozhin, and then within 48 hours, the Wagner forces were in Belarus. They had completely bypassed Moscow and they had gone all the way north to Belarus. But before this happened, on the 24th of June, Mr. Putin gave a televised address in the morning of the day in which he denounced the Wagner actions as treason, and he vowed that he would crush this rebellion. But then what happened is that Wagner went all the way into Belarus. It was redeployed in broad daylight with the Western media cheering it on. And I said this was a psychological operation. And so that's a deal. So that is what happened in June, 23rd of June. Then, so it looked like Mr. Putin regarded Mr. Prigozhin as a traitor. But then you had in July, in the end of July, 27, 28 July, you had the Russia-Africa summit in St. Petersburg, in which Mr. Prigozhin did make an appearance. And it is also said that Mr. Prigozhin met with Mr. Putin twice after the apparent Wagner rebellion. So it looked like Mr. Prigozhin was back in the good books of the Kremlin, of Mr. Putin, of the Russian government. And then on the 23rd of August, he is dead, along with much of the Wagner top leadership, Mr. Dmitry Utkin, etc. So that is what happened. That is the backstory behind this. And now, like I said, if you were to name one candidate for the person who had this assassination conducted, if it was an assassination, it would from a probabilistic perspective, most likely be the boss himself, Mr. Putin. And then the question arises, why would Mr. Putin have Mr. Prigozhin assassinated? So there are two red flags, like I mentioned. First of all, Mr. Prigozhin said when he was launching his apparent coup that the justifications for the invasion of Ukraine were lies. So it is okay if he targets Mr. Shoigu and Mr. Gerasimov, but saying that the justifications for the Ukraine invasion were lies, that targeted Mr. Putin himself. That's the first red flag. That's the first line that he should not have crossed. Secondly, when he took the city of Rostov-on-Don, there was this very warm welcome that he was given by the citizens, which kind of indicated an anti-Putin sentiment that could not be allowed to spread. Thirdly, many people in the West, many people believe that this was a genuine coup attempt. And it's possible that many people in Russia also believe this. And the fact that no disciplinary punishment was given out to the perpetrators of the coup could be interpreted by many people as a sign of Mr. Putin's weakness, that Mr. Putin was able to do nothing. It was Mr. Lukashenko who saved the day for Russia, and Mr. Putin has done nothing thus far. So that sends out a very strong signal of Mr. Putin being incompetent and weak, and that is something somebody like Mr. Putin simply cannot afford. So overall, those are the three big red flags that I see. And overall, if you look at Mr. Prigozhin's career, well, he was kind of a loose cannon. He was unpredictable. He was mercurial. He was kind of unreliable. Maybe he was seen as a liability. And it's not bad to be unpredictable as a military commander. If you go back to 1915, Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, the Turkish general, later the Turkish dictator, he was quite unpredictable in his actions. When Winston Churchill launched the invasion of Gallipoli with the Anzac forces, Australians and New Zealanders, Mustafa Kemal Atatürk essentially disobeyed the orders of his superior, Liman von Sanders, the German general, and he took certain actions that actually saved the day for Turkey. But overall, he was a very good soldier. He was unpredictable in his actions, tactics on the battlefield, but he was not disloyal to his country. And overall, he was predictable. Overall, he was seen as a solid commander. Mr. Prigozhin was more of a loose cannon, and maybe he was seen as a long-term overall liability by Mr. Putin, and maybe his time was up. But we have to also, this is important, we have to look at the manner in which Mr. Prigozhin died. He died in a plane crash. He was not poisoned. This is important because Russia has a tradition of poisoning traitors. Think about Alexander Litvinenko, who was poisoned. He was a Russian defector, traitor, whatever you want to call him. He was poisoned with the radioactive element polonium-210. Then there are the father-daughter duo of Sergei and Yulia Skripal, who were poisoned with a Novichok nerve agent. Then you had Alexei Navalny, another Western pro-West politician in Russia, who was also poisoned with a nerve agent, most likely Novichok. These people survived, but there are plenty who would not have survived. So Russia typically sends a message to would-be traitors by poisoning known traitors. This is like a macabre tradition, you could say, in Russia. They poison traitors. When it comes to Mr. Prigozhin, he was awarded the title of Hero of the Russian Federation by Mr. Putin in the year 2022, which is the highest honorary title that you can get in Russia. That was just last year, right? And he was not poisoned. I mean, he was in Russia multiple times after the Wagner rebellion. There were plenty of opportunities to poison Mr. Prigozhin, but he was not poisoned. He went out literally with a bang. Mr. Prigozhin went out like a warrior. The Japanese samurai would say that he had a good death.
It was a good death.
Right? I mean, if you this may not make sense to most people, but from a warrior's perspective, the worst way to die is to die in your bed of old age. You would rather prefer to go out when you're still strong with a bang, doing what you do best, which is fighting. So, Mr. Prigozhin definitely did not die of poisoning. He died like a warrior in a plane crash, which is kind of like going out in battle. And it's also important to note that Mr. Putin sent his condolences to the family of Mr. Prigozhin. Mr. Putin would never ever send condolences to the family of any traitor who died. So most likely, it's a mixed bag kind of thing. Mr. Prigozhin was a patriot. He was a nationalist. He was a war hero. He did serve his nation. He did not betray his nation. But most likely, by this time, he was too much of a liability, and maybe for this combination of reasons, maybe that's why his assassination was maybe ordered because of these reasons. Then the question is, was I wrong about the Wagner rebellion being a psychological operation? Well, don't look at the optics. Don't look at the assassination of Mr. Prigozhin. Look at the outcome of the so-called Wagner rebellion. The clear as day outcome of the Wagner rebellion was the redeployment of the Wagner forces within 48 hours, in extremely rapid redeployment from the Donbas region all the way north into Belarus. That's the only outcome that you've had of the so-called Wagner rebellion. Not a single shot was fired against Russian forces that can be proven, and no action was taken to move on Moscow. So clearly, this was not a coup. Even if some people are trying to portray it as a coup, the outcome is that it was not a coup. It was a redeployment of the Wagner forces from Donbas into Belarus, and that is still there. And that could still come into play as the Ukraine war progresses. So it's very clear that I was not wrong. This was indeed a redeployment. It was indeed what you could call a psychological operation. It was not a coup. This was definitely not a coup. Then the question is this the end for Wagner? Well, I don't think it's the end for Wagner. It is being said that one of the senior Wagner commanders, Anton Yelizarov, is about to become, or may have already become, the new leader of Wagner. So this guy was one of the commanders, or maybe the commander in the Battle of Bakhmut, which was terrifying fighting, horrible fighting. He also fought in Syria. He also fought in the Central African Republic. He also fought in Libya. So he's a genuine war veteran, and he maybe has taken over the Wagner company. So he may be the new leader. So there are a number of possibilities that could happen. Firstly, the Wagner company, the Wagner Group could be restructured, means some elements could be, let go, and maybe the command structure could be changed a little bit. The bottom structure will remain more or less the same. The top structure will change. New leaders could be brought in, or some leaders could be promoted, some could be demoted, and so on. So some restructuring could happen. Secondly, another option is that Wagner could be absorbed into the Russian military, the regular military forces of Russia. But that kind of would be counterproductive, because the fact that Wagner is a private militia, a private company, a paramilitary force, that gives Russia lots of options. It gives them plausible deniability in their geopolitical activities in Africa. So most likely Wagner could not be entirely possibly reabsorbed or absorbed into the Russian military. And the last possibility is that it could continue with new leadership, with some restructuring, reorganization, and that could be perhaps the most likely outcome for Wagner. Wagner is an incredibly useful tool for the Kremlin, for Mr. Putin. It's essentially an indispensable tool in the geopolitical toolkit for Russia. It gives them plausible deniability, like I said. So I don't see the Wagner Group being disbanded or or shut down. I see it continuing in some shape or form. Most likely, it will continue as a private company. What is Mr. Prigozhin's legacy? Well, Mr. Prigozhin's legacy is kind of a mixed bag. If you look at his life's history, he spent several years in prison. So he was a criminal. He spent several years in prison. Then he came out of prison, became an entrepreneur, and he worked his way up in life, and he rose to the very top. He became the big boss's chef. He became the private chef for Mr. Putin. He kind of became Mr. Putin's friend to some extent and confidant, if Mr. Putin has friends, right? Then he became a warrior. He fought lots of battles. He led men into battle. He was the leader of the Wagner Company. And in the end, he went out with a bang. So that's the kind of legacy he had. Most of his life, he lived as an entrepreneur and as a soldier, as a warrior. And he more or less died as a warrior. Overall, he was a patriot. He was a nationalist, but he was a loose cannon. He never betrayed his country, but maybe he became too much of a liability in the end. So that's the kind of legacy Mr. Prigozhin has. So yeah, that's about it for my analysis of the death of Mr. Yevgeny Prigozhin. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.